Starting recording. And then, of course, I didn't share my screen. There we go. Share it right here. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Beyond the Track, the December 2020 edition, the year that everybody loves, right? Thanks for joining in. Thanks for watching this video, later. Hopefully it will be helpful if you're clicking on the video and, to check it out afterwards. Hopefully you're going to get a lot of value out of it, I'm pretty sure. Quick introductions. I'm Claudio La Sala. You can find me on the internet with that name or under 3-Lap Rider for my Instagram and YouTube and things like that. You have a little bit of my writing experience up there on the slide. And always a big thanks to the BTT supporters on Patreon that keep encouraging us to just keep on producing content here and coming up with tools for the website and things that we can do to essentially bring it out with us to the track, like little cards to hand all information over to new riders that we meet at the track and keep the community growing. And you who are either here during the live meeting or watching it later, you guys are the reason why these things keep happening, right? Otherwise, if there's no audience, there's nobody watching, why would we be doing this? What the Beyond the Track is, it's essentially, it started as just a group of folks getting together in a classroom type of setup to share track riding experiences, lessons learned, sometimes the lessons learned the hard way, right? So we are trying to get together and share those things so that the lessons that we've learned the hard way, hopefully other people don't have to go through the same painful process, because when we get things wrong at the track, it can, we can get hurt, and that's not fun. So starting that as a community, we get together at the track as well. We help out each other. We help out new riders who are, going out to the track for the first time. We all who have been there, we know how it can be overwhelming with everything that's going on, being at the right place at the right time and, being all geared up, and what does the bike need to, be able to go through tech inspection and things like that. So we enjoy helping out each other. We have these meetings monthly. We've been having them for 3 years now, every month through off season and everything. In person when it was a possibility. With pandemic, we just transitioned over to virtual only, at least for the time being. All of these videos, they are available for free for everybody who just goes to the beyondthetrack.net website. There is a meeting videos page there. There's over like 40 hours worth of content, from the very basics, like introduction to track days. You're thinking about doing your very first track day ever. What do you need to know? There's one video for that. How do you use action cameras to analyze your riding and hopefully get better? There's a video for that. How do you use data telemetry, right, to figure out your best, your personal best, your theoretical best? There's a bunch of stuff. It's all out there. Crashing, when you crash, what do we do? How do we recover from it? Or how do you prevent crashing? Things like that. You can find a bunch of information there. You can become a patron for the BTT. Again, there are different layers that you can contribute every month, and it just helps us, keeping the thing going. There is a website that we have for the Patreon members. On the website, we have a bunch of tools to help you track costs, because this is a very expensive sport. Some people are, they have this idea that, well, I don't even want to know how much money goes into that. I'm the opposite. The better I understand my costs, the more I get to do it, right? The more I can streamline my costs and actually get to do more track days, because I know what we have checklists, because over time you're going to start hauling a bunch of stuff to the track, and you want to make sure that you don't forget anything. You don't forget your tire warmers. You don't forget the keys to your bike. You don't forget, certain tools that you may need at the track. Having a checklist, it helps a lot. It helps frustration. When you get to the track, you don't want to be concerned with other things. You want to be concerned with riding, right, and having a good time doing that. We have tools for to write our track day plans, figuring out what we're going to be working on, have a detailed plan so that you know what areas to focus on. You get back home from the track, you can do a debrief, like put down your notes, you know, have references to your YouTube videos with videos from your coach, from yourself, from other riders. Put some notes there, figure out what you need to do next time you go out to the track. We this month, of course, if you're in the northern hemisphere, as most of us here, we are during winter. It's not a lot of fun riding during winter time when it's really cold. So a lot of people just don't take the chance to go out and ride. A lot of us, we really don't care. We go, even if it's cold, we go, right? But it's also a good time for folks to do bike maintenance, right? The bike's gonna be like unridden for maybe 2 or 3 months. It's a good time to figure out what should you be doing, right? And then on the meeting description, we've put out there that maybe you have a sport bike and you are thinking about riding it at a track for the first time. Well, in what shape should this bike be? What should you be looking out to make sure that you're ready to go and have safe fun at the track? Maybe you've just finished your first track day year and maybe you've done like a couple of track days. Now you want to, like, you know, step up and start, you know, getting faster and learning more things. You need to do something else to your bike. Maybe you are already going at a pretty fast pace. Maybe you're racing, right? So you're demanding a lot more from your bike. There's more things that you should be concerned with, that you should be maintaining, using up this time to order parts, do the proper maintenance. And we are very fortunate to have Shaun joining us again, and he's very experienced with that. So, I mean, without further ado, you know, thanks, Shaun, a lot for joining us and offering to, you know, help us non-mechanics with this content. Appreciate it.
Very happy to help out wherever I can.
Awesome.
Yeah, so everybody listening, thank you for joining in. I posted a blog that Claudio has shared on this website. I don't know if anyone had a chance to go through it, but that explained a little bit about my history. Just in case you didn't, I started out as a mechanic when I was barely big enough to hold a torque wrench for my uncles, because they were both, one uncle was a mechanical engineer, automotive engineer, and the other was a farmer. So they would work together to do whatever needed to be done. So I would help out, and I started out rebuilding tractors and truck engines and harvesters. I replaced the engine in my mother's car when it broke down when I was 14. I started working on motorcycles when my girlfriend's motorcycle had some problems, so replaced piston and rings in a little single-cylinder commuter bike that she had. And then when I started racing, used the experience I had as a farm mechanic to work on my own bikes. At the time I was racing two-strokes, which are very easy to work on because they don't use valves. So that just made things even easier. So more recently, I have worked for several motorcycle dealerships in the Dallas area. Most recently, I was working at Adventure Motor. That's a KTM dealership in McKinney. I was the workshop manager there for almost a year before I got back into IT. So I went from spinning wrenches for a living to writing code. So a bit of a strange transition, I admit, but nevertheless, I've been working on motorcycles for, well, let's see, since the mid-90s. So quite a bit of work in between. I've got my YouTube channel that shows a lot of maintenance work and guides on how to do things easier, quicker, more efficiently, and how to help people avoid making the mistakes that I did. And yeah, Claudio and I were discussing a good topic for end of season, and that is something that's dear to my heart, because when I was working in the dealerships, so many people would bring in motorcycles after they'd been sitting over winter, all winter, and the amount of money we would make clearing out carburetors and fuel tanks and fuel systems from crystallized ethanol was fantastic. The amount of money was incredible. So many people were just leaving a gas tank full of fuel over the winter, and then come summer, they'd go out, try to start their motorcycle, and it just would not run. And I would like to help you folks avoid that expense. So I've got a bit of a list here of things to cover. Let's see if I can keep my phone from dying. So first of all, as I mentioned, drain the gas. It's absolutely vital. Whatever you do, is when you know that you're not going to be riding at the track again for a while, drain the gas, whatever it takes. If you have to just put a little hose down into your gas tank and get a gas pump that you've bought from an auto parts store, that'll work. Drain the gas, whatever it takes. Take the tank off, tip it upside down, unhook the little petcock line from the tank to the fuel pump, whatever it takes. Get that gas out of there. The amount of ethanol in gas here in the USA is around 10%, give or take. And the volatiles in the gasoline will evaporate, but the ethanol will not. So that'll leave all of the ethanol behind after the gasoline is no longer even combustible. I mean, I've had situations where I could pour what was left in the tank out and it wouldn't catch fire. It smelled like paint varnish, like sometimes paint thinner. It didn't smell like gasoline anymore. And that crystallized ethanol does massive amounts of damage to your fuel system. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of draining the gas from your bike after you're done for the season. Okay, that's the number one issue. Secondly, take the battery out. Take it off and put it on a trickle charger. So if you've got a regular lead acid battery, just a standard low voltage trickle charger will be just fine. If you have a lithium ion battery, make sure you get a compatible battery charger. And most of them have a charge setting or a trickle setting, like a charge or a storage. I use the Sure-Eye charger, and those are the two options that one has. And I just leave it sitting on the workshop bench and sitting on trickle, and that way the charger senses when the voltage of the battery gets below a certain threshold, and then it starts charging just a little bit. And then when it's topped off, it shuts off the current to the battery. That way, it will make sure that the battery is kept in healthy condition. Even a lithium battery has a limit to how long it can stay sitting without a charger. I mean, lead acid ones could be as little as a month before they won't start the bike anymore. If you put it on a charger, it'll be fine for any length of time. With a lithium, they're a lot better, but it still does help if they can be on a specific lithium charger. Now make sure that you don't put a lithium battery, don't put a lead acid battery charger on a lithium battery. There's a big difference between the two. If you're not sure, by all means post up on the website and we'll be able to clarify. But it will save you from having to buy a new battery in the beginning of the season, because being on that trickle charger all season or all winter will make that battery perfectly usable when you go to use it, when you go to reinstall it prior to the first event at on the next season. Okay, next up, fork seals. So if you can, get down on your hands and knees and just take a look at the fork tubes, the slider. That's the part that the wheel is connected to. Bounce up and down on the handlebars and then take a look. And if you see a big black ring of oil around that fork slider, guess what? You need fork seals. However, if you bounce up and down on the handlebars and the front wheel moves up and down, and you get down on your hands and knees and look at the slider, and there's just the tiniest little ring of residue around the tube, well, then you're good. You're fine. You don't need to worry about it. But yeah, if you see a big black ring of schmutz around the slider section, the shiny section, then yes, you need new fork seals. It's actually a very simple job to do. You can do it without special tools. You can do it faster with the special tools, but you don't need to have special tools to do this. If you're curious how to do it on your particular bike, then yeah, I'm a big fan of YouTube tutorial videos. I've got a couple on how to do it for the Aprilia that I used to ride, and they're easy to find for all different brands. Okay, next up, while you're in the region, while you're in the vicinity, take a look at your brake pads, your front brake pads. Just undo the bolts, pull the caliper off, be very careful not to chip the paint off your wheel, and pop the pads out. Make sure that they've got enough material left over so that you won't run steel on steel. It's the sort of thing that you would be best off checking on a regular basis so you can gauge how quickly they wear. So for example, if you only check them at the end of the season, you may have left them too long, and you might find that there's no pad material left on a certain section of the pad backer. That's the steel plate. If you check them like 2 or 3 times a year, you get an idea of how quickly they will wear out. So it'll give you an indication of how many events you have left before the pad material will be gone. Because the worst thing for a brake disc, which is quite expensive, is to let that brake pad wear down to steel. You don't get much braking when that happens. They make a lot of noise and it'll destroy your brake disc. And of course, once that's happened, really the only solution is a new brake disc. So a little bit of preventative maintenance will save you that expense. Do the same on the rear brake. Of course, it's not as critical. A lot of people rarely use the brake on the rear, so it wouldn't hurt to check it a little less frequently. But then again, the other thing you really want to do, I should have even mentioned first, is clean your motorcycle. Clean the whole thing. But whatever you do, don't use water. Don't use soap. Don't use water. Use WD-40. It's a little more expensive, but it will extend the life of your motorcycle by an enormous amount. So don't put water on it, because water will always accumulate in places. It'll always cause fasteners to rust. No matter how hard you try, you'll never be able to get all of it off, and it will cause rust. Whereas if you use WD-40, it's like lotion for motorcycles. They love it. So the plastics and the rubber all benefit greatly from getting a coating of WD-40. And while you spray it on, wipe it off, and while you're doing that, you'll find all kinds of different things. You might find, oh, that bolt, that fastener is kind of loose. Wow, I'm glad I found that now, instead of having it come off and then have to find a replacement at the track. You might find that you have actually lost one. It's a good idea to find the missing fasteners before whatever it was attached to has started to vibrate and oscillate. So for example, with fiberglass fairings, a bolt or a fastener that's missing can cause that fiberglass to rattle and oscillate in the as a result of slipstream or even just engine vibration. And it might look okay, it might hold on well enough because there's other fasteners holding it in place, but it'll do damage. It'll cause the fiberglass to flex, and then it'll get stress cracks, or it'll cause a bracket to flex and then bend. So yeah, the best way to find that out is to clean the machine. So if it's a specific race only or track only motorcycle and you've got track plastics, then just take them off, peel them off, go through the whole thing with a rag and a can of WD-40. The investment is absolutely worth it. Firstly, as I mentioned, the motorcycle plastics and the rubbers will love it, and they'll last longer, and you won't get that dried out, cracked, deteriorated plastics and rubber that will happen over time. Okay, so that's the brake pads, the cleaning, and of course the chain. Everyone knows how to check a chain, right? I'm hopeful. So on the swing arm, yes, on your swing arm, there's a sticker that says the chain should be adjusted to these specifications. So you might find that the sticker says that the chain should be deflected to a maximum of 2 inches. So that means that you can literally measure the deflection of the chain just by pushing it down and then pushing it all the way up. The difference here is that when you sit on the motorcycle, the tension of the chain changes. It reminds me of one time when we were doing a track day at Coda with RideSmart. This is back in the early days of Coda, and it might have even been the first time RideSmart went to Coda. I was doing all the tech inspections, and we had at least 10 BMW S1000RRs, and the chains were adjusted so tight that when people sat on the bike, I could hear the bearings and the suspension linkages creaking. What happened is the local Austin BMW dealership had just hired a guy who had only ever worked on Harleys, and Harleys have belts for their final drive. So he adjusted those chains the same way he would adjust a belt, which was to say they were bowstring tight. And I was checking every single chain, and I said to every single one of them, that is an unsafe chain. It's going to do damage, and it's also going to restrict your suspension motion because it is just so tight. And I said, when was this done? Like, who adjusted this chain? And every single one of them said, oh, I just had the local dealership fit new tires specifically for this weekend. And yeah, every single one of them was done at the same dealership, and no doubt by the same mechanic, which is, it's very dangerous. It's very damaging. So look at that sticker on your swing arm. Make sure that you can adjust, or you can deflect the chain by the recommended amount, but not more. If it can be adjusted, if it can be deflected by more, then what's going to happen is it's going to slap against the swing arm. And there is a plastic guard to prevent damage, but you don't want to go grinding through that guard if it's too loose. And if it is too loose, that there is a possible, although unlikely chance that it will actually skip off the sprocket. And if that is to happen, if that were to happen, then that can either be just a sudden loss of drive and you just you just come gliding to a halt, or the chain can actually wrap around the sprocket, the drive sprocket, and rip the transmission gear out of the engine. I've seen both. I've had both happen to me. Luckily, when it damaged the sprocket, the drive sprocket, it was on my dirt bike, and I was able to fix that quite easily. And when I was racing, I lost the chain, and all of a sudden, just I was revving and nothing happened. And I realized that fortunately for me, the chain had just come loose and very conveniently left itself lying on the track. So yeah, we've got a question from Earl.
Yeah, Shaun, I'm so glad you're you're talking about chains. And so a lot of the bikes that I've ridden now, gratefully, the bikes that my son rides, they have that sticker. But in the heat of the moment, in the pit, is there an acceptable level of play? Is there a relation? Because honestly, chains have been the bane of my existence. And so is there like an acceptable threshold of tolerance that you would say, in chain play, in relation to wear on sprocket tooth, like when it gets rounded off, or if that's a topic that you're going to address next, I'm totally fine holding that off. But just those two things have essentially been plaguing me because I've been paranoid about it.
Right. Well, it's a very simple thing to check, but the key is you've got to make sure that you check it with the rider on the bike. There's little to no benefit doing it if the bike is on a side stand or a kickstand and there's no one sitting on it. That
Gotcha.
is not that's not a good test. So put the rider on the bike, put the bike on the rear stand, and then take a look. It's got to have at least an absolute minimum of 1 inch of up and down deflection. If it's less than that, it will literally prevent the rear swing arm from moving through its full travel.
Perfect.
So
that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay.
Because I've been trying to figure it out. I mean, I know it's simple to you, but man, this has been plaguing me for years.
Yeah, totally. I totally understand. So yeah, make sure it's an absolute minimum of 1 inch up and down movement. It wouldn't hurt to have it be more than 1 inch up and down, but there will come a point where you just get an idea of what's best for that particular bike, for that particular rider, or for that particular track. I mean, if it's a really smooth track like Eagles Canyon, you could literally get away with less chain deflection because the suspension it won't have the massive bumps that the old Eagles Canyon used to have.
Right. And does that change over? I mean, do you do a series of adjustments over a set series of laps, or is it just a one and done?
It's not going to change during the day. So
Okay.
that's not necessary to check multiple times during the day. But every time you change tires, you will need to readjust. Every time you change gearing, you will need to readjust. It's really not necessary. Actually, having said that, the point of, or the period of greatest wear on a chain is its initial use. So if you're putting a brand new chain on, set the tension, set the deflection in the middle of the lower chain run, and then after you've used it for one full day, check it again. And after that, you'll probably find that it doesn't change after that first adjustment, after that first check where you adjust it again.
Right. Yeah. So, because I've seen that the R3 is quite a bit more resilient than, say, the Ovale that Garrett was riding in 2020 or this year. But I have seen, as you know, one of the techniques to keep RPMs high, coming out of turns, especially in straights, is to keep that bike at an angle to keep the RPMs high.
Yes.
But I've seen that increases chain wear. And so I just never knew how to tackle it. So I didn't really know how often to check it.
Yep. That brings up a very interesting point because, of course, remember, the reason people recommend you continue leaning through a corner is because the gearing changes. When you're on the edge of the tire is a smaller diameter. So it's literally the same as going in a lower gear. But that also means that the chain is running against the side plates for longer. So technically, it will wear out a little faster. The Ovale has I believe it has a non-O-ring chain, so that's also going to wear out more quickly.
That's right.
Because there was an article written by Kevin Cameron where he measured the temperature that a O-ring chain was running at. And it was basically enough heat in that chain that it would take about 750 watts to generate that much heat in a chain. And that was about a half a horsepower of heat, a half a horsepower taken to generate that much heat in the chain. Right. So an O-ring chain takes a lot of energy out of the drivetrain.
Yeah, which is energy lost.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's half a horsepower less drive power. Yep. So that's why non-O-ring chains are more common in race machines. But on a Ninja 300, it's fitted from the factory with an O-ring chain that'll last a lot longer. But it'll take more power out of the drivetrain. Right. And of course, check the drive chain play. Make sure it's adjusted. Make sure that the axle is completely parallel to the swing arm pivot. There's a bunch of different methods to do that. I can actually demonstrate a few. There's all kinds of tools and little gadgets available to help make sure that your wheel axle is parallel to the swing arm pivot. Because, of course, the less parallel it is, the more out of true the sprocket is running in the chain, and the more it wears the chain and the sprocket.
Yeah, well, it's just no, thank you. I mean, really, that helps me a lot because I usually I usually go back to 2 or 3 basic points in the heat of the moment in between laps. If when a sprint race is done and if he has to go out on another race, then I have to work on the bike, and it's just me, and usually a couple other guys, but they're not on my team or they're not hard mechanics, so I have to figure it out for myself and direct. Right. So I'd rather spend time triaging the issue prior and say, okay, look, this is what I know what to look for, and this has been one of the things that's been plaguing my mind when it comes to these in between sessions and the chain. So thank you, appreciate that.
No problem. It's a good thing to take care of because, like I said, a poorly maintained chain can literally rip the drive shaft out of the engine. I've seen it done. There's some pretty well-documented cases back when I was racing in Australia where it was I think it was a superbike in the Australian Superbike Championship that had a chain come loose and wrapped itself around the drive sprocket, and the engine literally tore itself in half. So it's definitely a good idea to keep a close eye on the health of your chain. And of course, if you ever see shiny chain links, that means that you've gone too long between lubes. And also, another good thing to remember is the best chain lube is just plain engine oil. Don't bother getting expensive Motul high tack chain lubes. They will all get flung off. The best thing that soaks into those O-rings and X-rings and W-rings, whatever, is just regular engine oil. So make sure you only lube it after it's hot. So let the chain warm up, whatever you need to do to warm it up, and then slide some engine oil around it, on top of it, and then it will fling off, but it will also hold a lot of oil in the rings, because when it's hot, the oil will viscosity reduces and it'll slip in between those seals, and the excess will fling off, but it'll hold a good reservoir in there.
Any specific weight to the oil that you recommend?
Well, the higher you can get, the better. So gear oil is the best, but that's not all of us have a little squirt bottle of gear oil sitting around. I just happen to have some specifically for my ride-on mower, and I thought, oh wow, that's a 80 weight. It was 80 W90, and it's perfect. So I use that as chain lube, and it's a lot cheaper. Yeah, it's great. So
is there any changes in the cleaning procedure of that? Like, you got motor oil on your chain. Do you have to clean it any different than having regular lube?
No, just as always, WD-40 and a rag. It comes off really quickly, really easily. Not a problem at all. It will cause a little smoke if you let it get onto your exhaust pipes, that if you've got a rear exhaust like a V4 or something like that. But as always, the best thing to do is just clean the bike with a rag and WD-40. Okay. Any other questions on that issue? If not, okay, let's move on. So, of course, with the chain is sprocket maintenance. I've never seen an aluminum front sprocket, so they always last longer than an aluminum. Sorry, I've never seen an aluminum front sprocket. They're always steel, and as everyone knows, the steel sprockets will last longer than the aluminum sprockets that often are used on the rear. And of course, we use aluminum sprockets on the rear to reduce unsprung weight, which is another issue we can get into later. But yeah, check your sprockets, make sure that the teeth don't get ground off to too fine a point. We don't want the chain to slip on rounded over teeth, but that's really easy to check. I don't know how often people are required to change gearing, but that obviously extends the life of a sprocket if you're swapping from one sprocket to the next based on the track. So just keep an eye on it, and rest assured that the rears will outlast the fronts. Sorry, the fronts will outlast the rears. Sorry, because yeah, steel will last a lot longer. Okay, so that was the chain. So again, back to winterizing. Drain your coolant. So here where I live, it often gets below freezing during winter, and the last thing I want is for the coolant to freeze. So quite a few race bodies demand that you do not run glycol. So that means that the water in your coolant system can actually freeze. So drain it, just get rid of it, pull it out, and while you do, just take a look at it, drain it into a bucket and take a look, see if there's anything untoward in there. I remember one time I rebuilt a Ducati 996 engine, and after I had run the engine for a few minutes, I drained the coolant and looked at it, and yeah, I found some chunks of metal that should not have been in there. But that engine had been, or the components had been sitting for months and months, so it was literally just a case of flushing out all the dirt and crud that had accumulated in these parts. So yeah, drain your coolant and seal the system up again, but leave it empty, because the hoses and the fittings, they're steel. they will last longer if there's not corrosive coolant in them for any length of time. It wouldn't hurt to check your water pump. There's various seals and gaskets. Obviously, if your motorcycle is relatively new, then you don't have to worry about that. But say, for example, I've got a few older motorcycles. My RC30 was a 1980s model, and yeah, the seals and gaskets on that literally rusted away because they sat for so long with coolant in them. So just be aware of that. So drain your coolant. Okay, next, very important subject is the hydraulic fluid. So while you are draining your gas, take a look at your brake fluid reservoirs. If you've got the kind that are plastic that you can see through, it makes it easy. But if you don't, if you've got those integrated aluminum little reservoirs, take the lid off and take a look at the color of the fluid. Now remember, this fluid gets really hot. That is what is pressing against the brake pads, and the way a motorcycle stops is it converts the forward motion into heat, and brake fluid is specifically designed to not boil. But brake fluid is hygroscopic, so it absorbs moisture, it absorbs water as soon as that cap is opened. So never use brake fluid that's been stored in an open container, and always keep that cap, your reservoir cap, closed. Don't ever leave it open overnight. Don't leave it open for any length of time, because as soon as you open that cap, it'll start absorbing water from the atmosphere, and water does not have nearly the boil resistance of brake fluid. So what will happen if you pour in brake fluid into your reservoir from a container that's been open overnight or any length of time, and it has absorbed a lot of water, when you're riding and you squeeze that brake lever, the water content in that fluid will start to boil. It'll literally turn into steam, and it will expand, but then after it cools down, it'll turn back to moisture. It'll turn back to a liquid, but it'll cause some horrific inconsistency at the lever. So always use brand new brake fluid. Don't ever buy those gigantic bottles that people who drive cars need to use, because they have to have like a half a liter in their braking system. That's why those are great big bottles. Always buy the smallest bottle you can, so that you never have to worry about it sitting around for any length of time. The longer it sits, the more moisture it will absorb. So yeah, keep an eye on the color. If it starts to go dark brown, swap it out. It's absorbing and getting contaminated by brake pad material or corrosion in the lines. Swap it out and make sure it's always clear in color. If you've got a hydraulic clutch, do the same thing. Take a look at the color. Don't fill it from an open bottle, and always keep that cap closed as much as possible. The other thing I like to do is replace the bleed nipples with speed bleeders. If you're ever on a motorcycle accessory seller website, just do a search for speed bleeders and take a look. They make the chore of swapping your brake fluid a lot quicker and a lot easier. So they've got a little one-way valve in the bleed nipple, so instead of having to make a full motion action to pump the fluid out of the system, it's a much easier system. It's a much easier process. All you have to do is squeeze the lever, and the old fluid will go squirting out of that speed bleeder, and then you don't have to worry about air getting back into the system when you release the lever. So it's highly recommended. It'll make the process a little quicker, well, a lot quicker. So make sure you do that for your brakes, make sure you do it for your clutch, and make sure you don't forget your rear brake too. As I mentioned, we don't use our rear brakes nearly as much, but it's much better to have the rear brake be reliable when you need it, which of course varies depending on the rider. Okay, and another issue is the clutch itself. I remember having what was it? I think it was a CBR I think it was a CBR 1000, and the rider came and said, "Look, it's really a grabby clutch. Like sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't work at all. It's inconsistent." So I pulled the clutch out, and for some strange reason, some of the fiber plates had worn away. They were just steel on steel. So for anyone who's not familiar with the process, the clutch works by having anywhere from 3 to 9 steel plates and a similar number of fiber plates. And the fiber plates wear out. They are literally designed just like brake pads. They're expected to wear away by rubbing against the steel plates. That's one of the reasons that motorcycle oil is different to car engine oil. That oil is designed to work with those friction plates rubbing against the steel plates. So you don't want to put car oil in your motorcycle, because the car oil has friction modifiers, because every car I know of has a dry clutch because it's more efficient. So yeah, don't use car engine oil in your motorcycle, because it will cause problems with your wet clutch. However, those of us who have a dry clutch in your motorcycle can use car engine oil, which is also, just as it happens, cheaper. So yeah, if you are mechanically inclined, pull the side cover off your engine and undo the clutch and check the plates. You might find that the friction material is wafer thin and in need of replacement, or you might find that it's in perfectly good condition. Either way, it's good to be aware of the condition of your clutch. If you have a particular bike that is really rough on clutches during a start, you might find that you have to replace your clutch more often. But if you're doing track days, we don't have to worry about race starts, so the clutches last a lot longer. Either way, it's good to be aware of the condition of your clutch, and the best thing to do is to check it now at the end of the season, so that if you do need a new one, you can order it, and you don't have to worry about paying extra for overnight shipping or rush shipping, because you've got all the time you need to order the right clutch in and then fit it at your leisure. And then when you know that you have another event, you don't have to worry about last-minute repairs and last-minute maintenance. So do it now when we've got plenty of time before the next event. And if you are racing, be aware that if you've fitted a new clutch, the friction characteristics will be different. So the best thing to do would be to fit the new clutch and then do a few practice starts. So you can literally bed the clutch in before you have a race, so that way you know the new friction characteristics for that first race start. Let's see, I haven't covered tires at all, because that's a whole different subject. That's not really something you need to worry about for end of season maintenance. And hopefully by the time the season is over, your tires are completely worn out anyway, so you won't have to worry about the condition they're in.
I believe Jesse has a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. You just talked about clutches, so I also wanted to lead into clutch cables and throttle cables.
Sure, yeah.
What do you lube them with? Because I know you have to lube them. I clean mine with WD-40, but I don't like to lube with WD-40 because it grabs moisture.
Hang on, say that last part again, something about moisture?
I don't prefer to lube with WD-40 because WD-40 kind of like grabs onto moisture and whatnot.
Well, WD-40 actually displaces moisture, but what WD-40 also does is it can attract dust. So yeah, if you do use WD-40, it's the same reason you don't use oil in a lock, because the oil will attract dust. So any dust that lands on the WD-40 or the oil in a lock will create sort of like a mud. So if you do use a lube, you need to be aware of the fact that will happen. But it's better to use I'm using my years of experience here. I would always recommend to use WD-40 because it'll prevent corrosion and it'll prevent a buildup of any residues that can come from the internal structure of the clutch line. But again, it's the sort of thing you need to do on a regular basis. So you need to lube it and then you need to flush it out on a regular basis. So regular as in, maybe once every month, maybe once every 3 or 6, whatever, on a regular basis. So just be aware of the condition that they're in. But get one of those cable lubers. So those are brilliant. It'll literally clamp over one end of the cable, and you can put the straw from the WD-40 can in the side, and then just push the button, and you can hear it hissing. And then after a few seconds, you'll see the WD-40 and a bunch of gunk come out the other end of the cable. That is what you're aiming for. That gunk coming out is what can really help. And then once you've done that, the action of the clutch, you'll notice, is significantly smoother. So yeah, definitely, clutch cables are a great thing to lube on a regular basis. The brake lines, that's probably an issue for a separate topic, because there's so much information on the rubber versus braided lines, modular versus custom made, all kinds of different things. I've got a video on doing a custom set of brake lines for my supermoto racer, which I got a lot of help on from Venhill. Really good company, based down in Austin, is their importer. If you're interested, take a look on my YouTube channel that Claudio has shared, and do a search for brake lines or Venhill, something like that, and those videos will come up. And there's a lot of information on this subject, a little more than we should probably go into right now. Yeah, there we go, there it is. There are so many options available, and as it is, I've actually got some quick release brake lines on that supermoto racer, which are fantastic. It allows me to swap the wheels really quickly without having to leave the calipers hanging on the lines, which I've never been a big fan of. Okay, were there any other questions, issues, comments, concerns?
Oh, I got one. Because you were talking about draining the fuel out of your tank.
Yes.
Would this only be for ethanol gas? Because I have non-ethanol gas in my Ninja 250 that I leave in there, but
Sure,
I haven't done
yeah. I actually make my own ethanol-free gas, and I'm doing an experiment right now. I've had ethanol-free gas in a leaf blower, and I couldn't get the thing started. So it's been sitting in there for a year now. And pretty soon I'm going to fix the ignition issue on that leaf blower. And I am 100% confident that that year-old gas will still work just fine in that carburetor. But I'll put a video up showing the results. So yeah, if you've got ethanol-free gas, yeah, leave it in. It doesn't matter. It'll be just fine. The best thing to do, though, would be to actually top it all the way up. So that way the fuel will prevent the interior of the tank from rusting. So yeah, all or nothing.
to ask, because yeah, usually when it comes to like winterizing some vehicles, I was always told to put non-ethanol fuel and keep it full,
Yes.
so you don't get
Yes.
rust in the tank, because then
Yep, exactly.
you'll lose the fuel pump at that point.
Yep, absolutely. Highly recommend it. I've got a couple of, well, I sold my vintage race bike, but yeah, it was always full of ethanol-free gas, and it never had a problem. But yeah, like I mentioned, I made a lot of money fixing ethanol issues on motorcycles where the gas was sitting over time and it just turns to crud. There was one ZX11 where the fuel tap had one of the carburetors had a slight leak. So as a result, the carburetors were getting a constant flow of new ethanol gas, and the ethanol crystallized until it completely filled up all the bowls on the carburetors. It was a horrific mess. So ethanol free is great. If it's not ethanol free, then by all means, please drain it. You will benefit hugely. Okay. Any other issues, questions?
Yeah, Shaun, this is Michael here. I have a semi-related question, and this is partly due to my age growing up on carbureted motorcycles that had fuel petcocks. And in the 21st century, one of my eternal challenges working on bikes is a fuel-injected bike where the fuel line bolts onto the gas tank and there's no petcock to shut off the gas flow, and I need to remove the gas tank.
Yep.
What are you supposed to do to unbolt the fuel line without the fuel evacuating all over you and everything else you have there? How is that process supposed to work?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. Firstly, what I just did on my Ducati is I went to O'Reilly's and I said, I just need a fuel pump. And they handed me one off the rack and said, here you go. It was a carbureted engine fuel pump. And I connected a long hose to it, and I put the other end into my gas can, and I just hooked up to a battery and literally pumped the fuel out. So I left the fuel tank in place. I pumped out all the gas, and then I started the engine. It idled for maybe a minute, and then it died because it was completely empty. There might have been a few drops left in the tank, but nothing else. If you want to unhook the fuel line, it's possible to do that by disconnecting well, let's see. I mean, there's no way to do it without making a mess. That's the thing you've got to get used to. It's always going to leak a little bit, but that's what the WD-40 in a rag is for. Ironically, sometimes the gas will clean away a little bit of crud, little bit of oily residue. You'll see little bits of gravel inside the crevices in your engine, and yeah, let the gasoline clean that off. If you are really technically minded, then you can get a ECU diagnostics tool and connect that to your laptop, and you can turn on the fuel pump. So that way you can disconnect the line to the fuel injection rail and just put that output from the pump into your gas can, and just turn on the fuel pump and let it pump until the tank is empty. I've got that for my Aprilia, so that's how I would empty that tank. I don't have that for my Ducati yet, so that's why I had to get an aftermarket pump. Just poked it down through the filler opening, and pump the gas out that way. But yeah, if you don't have ethanol free, get that fuel out of your bike. You will benefit a huge amount.
Gotcha. I appreciate the validation on that one. I think everybody's seen my little orange box with a fuel pump in it that I take to the track because I'm lazy. I'll just pump the gas into the bike, but I originally had the fuel pump for, draining the tank.
Getting it out.
Figure out any other way to do it. So thank you for validating that I'm not just being...
No, absolutely. I'm actually working on a little invention right now.
No tools, special equipment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a good idea. I'm also working on a little invention where I've got 3 fuel pumps in the bottom of my gas can, so I don't have to pick up the gas can to fill up the bike. So I can just get a long hose, poke it into the tank, and then push a button, and it pumps everything in. And then when I'm done, it'll pump everything out as well. So it's definitely a good idea.
That's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else with other questions or issues?
Yeah, I got one more question on chains that you touched on before, and I couldn't talk because of the background here.
Sure.
On the swing arm is a sticker that shows when your chain is worn out. You take the slack out as the chain tends to wear, and when you get to the red zone on the sticker, you replace your chain. The catch with this is if you're running stock sprockets and a stock length chain, maybe that's okay as an indicator, but as soon as you change your gearing and you have a different count of links on your chain, that is entirely useless. So how do you determine when you should be replacing your chain? What's your indicator at that point?
Well, the sticker is giving you an indication of how much free play is too much. So you don't want that chain to slap against the bottom of your swing arm, because it can wear and grind through the little nylon protector that prevents the chain from hitting the aluminum swing arm. It doesn't matter how many linkages or how many links are in your chain, the same rule applies. So whether the gearing is different, whether the chain length is different, you still want to prevent that chain from slapping against your swing arm. So the same rules still apply, regardless of the different sprocket or the different length of chain.
Okay, because I was thinking that was a length indicator where your axle position is. Once your axle is slid back an inch from its original set, you still have your amount of chain slack that needs to be correct. But at some point, it indicates that your rear axle has moved back an inch, and that's kind of indicating that your chain is worn out at that point, because it's essentially stretched and it's kind of reached the limit. Right. Because if you had 6 inches of adjustment on your rear axle, you could always keep the correct tension, but the bushings and everything else in the chain are completely worn out. And now your indicator that your chain is worn out is you're riding on the track and the chain snaps.
Right.
It's completely toast.
Right. So that's a case of checking the stiffness of the links. So if you notice that while you're adjusting your chain, it is like what's a comparison? You want to make sure that the linkages, the individual links, don't flex too easily. So that would indicate that the O-rings in between each link are completely worn out. What'll happen is, quite often I've seen several cases where the little X-rings in one chain were just being spat out. So the owner came to me and said, "Look, what's this? Every time I ride, I see these little rings, these little plastic O-rings everywhere." And I said, "Those are the X-rings from your chain. That's a bad sign." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, look, those things come from within your chain. Those are what seals the lubricant inside the chain." And he says, "Well, why are they coming out?" I said, "Because your chain is completely worn out." So it's those O-rings and X-rings that contain the lubricant. When they wear out, then you've got no lube, so it's metal on metal contact. So if you are adjusting your chain every race, then double check the stiffness of the links of in the chain. How else can I describe it? If you find that your chain is constantly loose, then it's going to be worn out. If you find that it was too loose at the beginning of the race and then it's too loose again at the end of the race after you've adjusted it, that's when it's time for a replacement.
Gotcha.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I got another one for you, Shaun. You talked about port seals and replacing port seals earlier.
Yes.
I am in that situation right now. I do have visibly leaking port seals I need to replace. I have done this work before on conventional ports many times. I need to do it this time on an upside down port. Is the approach different? Because normally on a right side up port, the seals just slide right off the end of the port stanchion. But on an upside down port, I'm not sure how the seals actually come out, because you have where the axle is secured, which is larger than the port tube. Is this a lot more work that I'm going to be facing when I try to do this for the first time, or is there a trick of doing it?
There's no trick per se. There are so many different designs of forks that many of them have different methods. So the only way to do it properly is to get a service manual and all of the right tools and just take it one step at a time. It is more complex than doing it for an old school standard fork, where the slider is, or what we would call the slider, is clamped in the triples. But yeah, there's no alternative. You just got to do it the right way. So for your machine, get the workshop manual and take it one step at a time.
Cool. Appreciate that.
Anyone else got any issues or questions? Okay, Claudio, looks like that may have covered everything.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so,
No, I got one for you, Shaun.
Oh, sure.
Michael again. Sorry, I wanted to give everybody else a chance. So
Sure.
something I was working on last week was on my race fairing. It is fiberglass, and it needed some repair. So I think everybody's probably familiar with getting some marine resin and some fiberglass matting and doing some fiberglass repairs. This time I did something a little bit different, because in the past I've used the two-part catalyzed resin, where you add a peroxide to it to set off the cross-linking in the polymer, and you have like a 20 or 30-minute gel time, and then it sets up and you can't work with it anymore. I did something different this time. It was more expensive, but I used a UV cured epoxy instead. So I did my fiberglass repairs to fix my cracks and some of the problems in the fairing. But honestly, I've never used this before. I don't know how well it's going to hold up. It was really nice because I could do my repair without it setting up. And then I hit it with the UV light for about 20 seconds, and it's fully cured. I mean, I could touch it, was not sticky. It seems to be strong. Have you used this product? Does it work well? Are there problems with it that I'm going to encounter later? Again, I was just fixing some minor cracks from the inside of the fairing, so it was relatively easy fix, but I honestly don't know how strong or how well it's going to hold up long term.
Yeah. No, that's great stuff. I actually, when I was in college, my major was in material science, and my specialty was advanced composites. I was getting ready to work on aircraft, so I worked a lot with these materials. And I've got a friend of mine who runs the Loyal Wingman program for Boeing, and he's been telling me about these materials for a while now. They're great. They're fantastic. They were, of course, developed in the aviation industry, and they're much quicker setting than conventional fiberglass epoxies and I can never remember that word, polyesters. So yeah, if you can get that stuff, it's a lot more expensive, but it works great. It doesn't give you the green working time that standard polyester does, but if you have a small area, you don't need to trim it or work it, then yeah, use that UV cure epoxy. It's great stuff. I'd love to use it more often, but like I said, it's just more expensive. So I stick with the standard polyester for large areas, or for small, high-strength applications, I use epoxy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great stuff.
Yeah, I did notice there was no waste, because I'm not mixing it up in a cup with the
Exactly.
peroxide to catalyze it. And I literally only used what I needed to make the repair, and then hit it with the UV, and there was so it is pricey. It's like 4 times the price, but
yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that, because it was I actually did the repairs at night, just so there was no UV from the sun. But
Good idea.
I now have a very, very strong black light for curing epoxy.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I mean, it may cost 4 times as much, but if you use 4 times less, then it kind of works out.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. Yeah, I actually have I got an aftermarket fiberglass fairing on my Ducati that needs some work, so I may do some work on that and catch some of the tricks on video when I was in college, we had a professor who always said, no matter what happens, make sure you can bamboozle your clients with jargon. So he made us memorize hexachloroendomethyl tetrahydrophthalic acid just so we could show off.
My goodness, now how do you spell that?
Now you just sound like somebody who works for Microsoft. I'm kidding, Claudio. I'm
Oh,
kidding.
no,
I
that's
mean, I actually love
words.
Microsoft.
Right?
I love Microsoft.
I don't, not anymore. Don't get me started, man.
I know, right?
Very cool.
Okay, so over to you, Claudio.
All right. Well, nothing else, guys. No extra questions to get ready. Bikes ready for racing season or track days or anything specific on the mini bikes that you guys may think of?
I will tell you this. This has probably been one of, not like the other ones haven't, but this has probably been one of the most informative sessions for me, only because I'm transitioning for Garrett from the Mini to the R3 next year. We are going to have an arsenal of bikes ranging from an R3 to a 190. Because he's 14, he cannot race the 190 in in the TMGP series. But it is just me. Outside of our friendship at the track and what we share in terms of knowledge, when it comes to race days, it's every man for himself. Usually there's teams and so on and so forth. And I'm a one man crew for my son, so this is invaluable knowledge. It's the devil's in the details, and these details is something that nobody's touched for me before. So thanks, Shaun. Really, like it helps more than you know. Yeah.
And actually, that's something I wanted to mention or reiterate. I've got a lot of tutorials on regular maintenance on my YouTube channel. So if there's something you need to know about or want to know about, just let me know. And if I don't have something on there on that subject, I'd be happy to cover it in as much detail as needed.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely appreciate it. But more so, like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to let Garrett know, how, in order to have a relationship with his bike and really understand what the machine is feeling, he has to learn how to work on the bike, not just pull in every 20 laps and say, Dad, this is how it's going, right? And so whatever you're telling me and whatever I've heard today, I'm going to pass on to him, and he's been listening in. So yeah, and I'll let him know to ask as well, because next year we will be riding CMRA, Moto America Junior Cup, TMGP when we can. But this is information that would save me 2-3 hours, in a parking lot. Like, if I was to sit there and Google and say, what do I do in this scenario?
Yeah.
So it really, really helps. So yeah, thank you.
Glad to help.
Very cool. All right, excellent. Well, if we have no more closing thoughts, this is it for this year's BTT, last BTT of the year. We'll definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys back in January. We already have a topic lined up with Jesse talking about, the process of getting, a custom suit and, what that entailed and sharing experiences with that. So look forward to that. And I'll be seeing some of you guys at the track or at the BTT next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Claudio. We'll see you guys on Saturday.
Thanks, guys. Yep. Well,
Thanks,
we'll see you
everybody.
this weekend.
Thanks, Claudio.
Yep.
All right.
Appreciate it.